where you're joining us from in the world. Thank you so much for joining this really important conversation on how climate action can go hand in hand together with economic recovery and green jobs. This is absolutely essential as we look at how we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Helen Mountford. I'm Vice President for Climate and Economics at the World Resources Institute, and I will be moderating this event today. As you will see, we have simultaneous interpretation available for the event. So we have both English and also Bahasa Indonesian available. If you look at the bottom of your toolbar, you should be able to select which language you want to listen to. Whether it's English, select English. And I hugely apologize, but if you want to listen to Bahasa Indonesian, you're going to have to select Japanese. I'm very sorry, but the Zoom function doesn't yet recognize Bahasa separately, so you have to select Japanese. But I'm hoping you will be able to see that and select it accordingly. So choose which language you're interested in following the webinar in, and please go ahead. So let's get started. The challenge of delivering a strong, inclusive, and green recovery is one that is facing many governments today around the world. How can we restart and reset our growth paths coming out of COVID-19, but onto a much better, more sustainable, more robust, and less risky pathway? How can we collectively build back better? We are very honored to be joined today by ministers from both Indonesia and the UK to share with us how they are tackling this challenge and identifying some of the real opportunities to build back better in their countries following the COVID-19 crisis. In addition, we will have a fantastic expert panel from countries around the world to share experiences on what we are seeing beyond. The COVID-19 crisis is causing devastating effects on health, on the economy, and on employment in countries around the world. But at the same time, it is also a once-in-a-generation moment for us to reset the broken systems that are serving neither people nor the environment well now. We've seen experience from the 2008-2009 financial crisis and more recently from investments that have shown how green investments can deliver better results in many cases than the alternatives. For example, recent work of the International Energy Agency estimates that each dollar invested on areas like building efficiency or clean urban transport or solar photovoltaics can create more than twice as many jobs as a dollar invested in coal or gas. So as countries are looking to reboot growth and to ensure employment, boost employment coming out of the crisis, selecting the green alternatives is going to be better than selecting fossil fuel investments. And we've seen similar results for investments in natural infrastructure, such as mangroves development or restoration of degraded lands. These can offer a triple dividend often of economic gains and employment, reduced environmental impacts, and health risks, reduce health risks. So there's really an opportunity coming out of this crisis, how devastating it is, but how we can actually reset our growth path to a much more sustainable, much more equitable, and more robust and less risky path. To provide the perspectives on how their countries are pursuing policies and investments that can help us to build back better in these times, I'd like to introduce our esteemed keynote speakers. We have the Right Honorable Lord Goldsmith, who is the Minister of State for the Pacific and the Environment, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Department for International Development, and the Department for Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs for the United Kingdom. Welcome, Minister Goldsmith. We also have with us His Excellency Minister Monarafa, the Minister for National Development Planning in Indonesia. Welcome, Minister Monarafa. Now let me first turn to Minister Goldsmith. Minister, the UK is one of the countries really leading the charge on a green recovery, with investments in green homes and energy efficiency improvements and infrastructure to encourage walking and R&D for green technology. The UK is also a leader in helping other countries to recover from the COVID-19 crisis and to do so in a way that is green and resilient. with signals that you will double international climate finance. Please, Minister Goldsmith, can you share with us more of what the UK is doing and where you see both the opportunities and the challenges going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. It would be a pleasure to do so, and thanks for your introductory remarks. And Selamat sore, Minister Monwarfa. I hope I've got the pronunciation vaguely okay. And also, of course, participants from Indonesia. And good morning to all of you in the UK, Europe, and any other part of the world where you are listening in from. I want to speak today about the two global threats that have already been mentioned, COVID-19 and climate change, and how our response to one could and should help us tackle the other. So the pandemic has plunged the world into a crisis of really unprecedented scope and scale. I don't think anyone could have predicted the sheer scale of its impacts. And the measures that we've had to take to control it have caused huge social and economic shocks. So even in areas which have been largely coronavirus free have not been spared the damage that we've all experienced to our economies. So it's also, I think, a really significant wake-up call, and not just in the narrow context of disease prevention, although there are profound lessons there as well, given what we know about the links between ecological disruption and the risk of zoonosis, but it goes much further than that. COVID is a symptom of our destructive approach towards the natural world, but it is just one such symptom. And appalling though this experience has been for so many families around the world, the science nevertheless tells us very clearly that it will be dwarfed by the effects of climate change and environmental degradation unless we act quickly and decisively. And the evidence is really very stark. Right now, there are around 1 million species facing extinction. We lose around 30 football pitches worth of forest every single minute. Around a third of marine mammals are threatened with extinction. Almost 2/3 of our coastal wetlands have been lost. Nearly a third of all fisheries are either gone or they're on the brink of going. Our ocean, meanwhile, is being choked with so much rubbish that by 2050, we're told it'll have more plastic than fish if you measure it by weight. And indeed, for the first time in its 15-year history, environmental risks have filled the top 5 places of the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. And the work of scientific experts, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Global Commission on Adaptation, and here in the UK, Professor Dasgupta's review on biodiversity, all tell largely the same somber story. We are undermining our very foundations, and it makes as little sense economically as it does ecologically, because after all, everything we have ultimately comes from nature. Our entire economic systems depend fundamentally on all those free services that nature provides. And of course, for many, many hundreds of millions of people, that dependence is far more immediate, far more direct. For example, 1 billion people depend on fish as their main source of protein. 1 billion people depend for their livelihoods on those same forests that we're wiping out at an extraordinary rate. As you know, we will be co-hosting the next and all-important climate COP, which will take place next year. Our focus naturally is going to be on clean energy, zero emissions vehicles, finance, adaptation and resilience. But at its core, we'll be putting a really major emphasis on nature. We know that we cannot solve climate change without restoring and protecting nature on a really massive scale. The two crises are inextricably linked. Indeed, they are really one crisis. And we know also that there is no pathway to net zero or to the Sustainable Development Goals that does not involve a massive scale up of nature-based solutions. They could provide, we're told, around 1/3 of the cost-effective climate change mitigation we need, while also helping communities adapt to reversing biodiversity loss and tackling poverty around the world. For example, in addition to providing livelihoods for over 1 billion people, I mentioned earlier, and a home to some 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, deforestation is the second biggest source of emissions. But despite the huge contribution that nature-based solutions can make, only around 3% of global climate funding is invested in nature. So as co-host of COP26, we are encouraging countries to dramatically scale up their support for nature, protecting what we have and restoring what we've lost. And we will be leading by example. As Helen mentioned in her introduction, the British Prime Minister at the last UN General Assembly committed that the UK would double our international climate finance to up to £11.6 billion. And crucially, he pledged that much of that additional money would be invested in nature-based solutions. But we know, of course, that there simply isn't enough public money to solve the problem alone. We also know, however, that there is much more that governments, as long as they work together, can do. For example, we need to look at the perverse incentives that drive destruction. Globally, incentives to destroy forests outstrip those in favor of protecting them by around 40 to 1. Some people put the figure much higher than that. Currently, the 50 biggest food-producing countries spend over $700 billion a year in support for often harmful agriculture, with only a tiny percentage going to sustainable land use. Now, that's around 4 times all of the world's aid agencies combined. And sooner or later, ideally sooner, we're going to have to foster a shift in the way that those subsidies are invested to reward sustainable practices that help protect the environment. So I want to return briefly to the COVID crisis, because as with so many crises, as Helen also said in her introduction, it does come with opportunities. As countries set about rebuilding their economies, we have a chance to do things differently, to do things better. Governments everywhere are already planning for economic recovery, and I believe around $11 trillion have already been put aside for the global recovery. So how that money is spent is going to have huge ramifications for generations to come. And we can stick with the status quo, knowing that high carbon, environmentally damaging industries lock in decades of emissions, or we can choose to make environmental sustainability and resilience the blueprint for our respective recoveries. And I'm delighted that our own Prime Minister has committed to build back better and build back greener. And that process has already begun. So there's just one example. In addition to what you heard in the introduction, the UK government has pledged £3 billion, which is 54 trillion Indonesian rupiah, towards making homes and public buildings more energy efficient, creating, we think, around 140,000 jobs and reducing energy demand for years to come. The good news is that there is more than enough evidence that a green recovery makes most economic sense. The International Energy Agency, for example, estimates that $1 trillion of investment in renewable energy over the next 3 years could create 9 million jobs. Wind and solar are already the cheapest sources of new electricity for more than 2/3 of the world's population. By 2030, renewables will cost less than existing coal and gas almost everywhere in the world. Now, the UK and Indonesia have been working together on climate change and environmental issues for well over a decade. And I'm really pleased that we currently work together in all of the priority areas that we've identified for COP. We're working together on reducing deforestation, degradation of precious peatlands, supporting renewable energy, green infrastructure, sustainable cities, and bringing more green investment into Indonesia. We supported the development of Indonesia's report, Low Carbon Development, a paradigm shift towards a green economy, with advice from leading climate experts, including Lord Stern and Ibu Mari Pangestu. The report concludes, as so many reports nowadays do, that a low carbon path can deliver higher, more sustained economic growth, as well as social and environmental benefits, including reducing extreme poverty. I'm delighted to see that so many of its recommendations are being mainstreamed now into Indonesia's current 5-year development plan. And I'm also pleased that our partnership is both continuing and growing, particularly in relation to nature-based solutions, where Indonesia has the potential, I think, to be a world leader. Indonesia has a wealth of solutions in its forests, its peatlands, its mangroves. Its forests absorb carbon from the atmosphere, they support biodiversity, provide food, water, and livelihoods for people. But as we know, they need careful and sustainable management if future generations are to draw on the extraordinary benefits they provide. In the UK, we're considering how best we can play our part, in particular by reducing the climate and environmental impacts of the goods that we import. And as part of that, we announced yesterday, we're working with businesses and countries like Indonesia to identify ways we can promote trade and development while also protecting forests and reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. The UK will also announce our own nationally determined contribution as soon as possible, and it will be ambitious. Last year, the UK, for example, became the first major economy in the world to pass laws to end its contribution to global warming by 2050, requiring the UK to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. Since 1990, we have already reduced emissions by 42% while growing the economy by over 2/3, 72%. So we know from experience that low carbon growth is not only possible, it can be cheaper and easier than higher carbon alternatives. But the challenges we face are clearly huge. To limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, we're going to need to cut global emissions by half over the next 10 years. And the current commitments fall far short of what is required. So we are urging every country to submit enhanced, nationally determined contributions, as well as ambitious long-term strategies committing to further cuts in carbon emissions by 2030 and to reaching net zero as soon as they possibly can. The coming months are absolutely critical for the climate and for the broader environment. Decisions taken now are going to have impacts for decades to come, and failure to act will impose vast costs, perhaps unmanageable costs, on future generations. We've got all the tools we need, and working together, it is so clearly now the right time to deploy them. So I just want to end by thanking you very much indeed, and I hope the future discussions are fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Goldsmith. Thank you so much for sharing those lessons that you have seen yourselves in the UK as you've moved forward with higher ambition on climate action, and also been able to decouple that and ensure that you had strong economic growth as well. Fantastic to hear that you're already applying this in place in terms of the economic recovery, identifying opportunities such as energy efficiency, where investments can bring jobs on the ground and can save money for households and for businesses. Your focus on nature, I think, is particularly important as we go forward. As you noted, nature-based solutions can provide about 1/3 of the cost-effective climate solutions, but at the moment they receive very little financing, under 3% of global climate finance. So this is something that does need to shift, and it's fantastic to hear the UK leadership on this in the lead up to COP26. It's also very relevant, as you mentioned, for your partnership with Indonesia, but also in terms of Indonesia's own actions as really a nature superpower, one who has real potential to seize this wealth and be able to deliver climate solutions, but also important solutions for growth, for equity, and for employment and income in the country. With that, I would like to turn to Minister Monarafa. It's a great honor to have you here, Minister. It's wonderful to have you with us. We'd love to hear a bit from you now on Indonesia's experience. Indonesia is really an important leader on sustainable development, and your groundbreaking work on the Low Carbon Development Initiative has been an inspiration to countries around the world. It's now been incorporated into Indonesia's midterm development plan, the RPJMN 2020 to 2024, making it one of the first economic development plans to really incorporate low carbon policy making. Tell us, Minister, what are the plans now for Indonesia's economic recovery, and what role might there be for this low carbon development approach, which can be both green and resilient and lead to greater equity benefits? Over to you, Minister Monarafa.
Thank you, Helen. Excellency, Lord Zach Goldsmith, Minister of State for the Pacific and the Environment, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, United Kingdom, Ibu Mari Pangestu. Selamat pagi Bu di sana. The World Bank Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnership, John Morton, UK Envoy, COP26, Lawrence Boone, Chief Economist, OECD, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you in the United Kingdom and the USA. Also good evening to all of you in Indonesia. It is a great pleasure for me to join all of you here. Let me first express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to all of you for your participation and support during a very hard situation. I would like to extend my thanks to the Consortium of New Climate Economy World Resources Institute for hosting this important event. We must do everything in our power to rebuild a more resilient and sustainable future by incorporating low carbon development and climate action plan. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to win this inevitable battle and fight against the pandemic amid the current condition, first, I would like to point out three main key strategies on what we need to do to build back better through low carbon development. First, develop and integrate green COVID-19 recovery plans to the National Development Planning documents. Despite Indonesia has made a historical movement by integrating low carbon development initiative into our National Medium-Term Development Plan, or RPDMN 22-22-4, we have yet to ensure that the low carbon policies still remain as priority agenda in our economic recovery plan. Second, the low carbon strategies should be incorporated as integral part of stimulus package for economic recovery. Numerous studies show that low carbon development, for example, on renewable and clean energy development, have potential to create jobs, provide cheaper power, and stimulate economic recovery. Currently, we are in the process of identifying the existing stimulus on low carbon. Then, we will develop a comprehensive stimulus package of low carbon and integrate them into our national planning. This green stimulus package is expected to accelerate transition toward low carbon development path. Third, building resilience to anticipate unprecedented shock in the future. As I mentioned before, that COVID-19 recovery should include our effort to ensure a sustainable and resilient future. First, we need a stronger plan to prepare socio-economic strategies for future shocks. It is essential for us to develop the ability to anticipate, recover, and adapt to unexpected threats. As such, a better air quality, water and sanitation, waste management, and effort to safeguard biodiversity by investing to sustainable infrastructure in renewable energy, food, water, health, and sanitation are keys for building resilience in the future. Build back better to enhance resilience also can be solved by strengthening livelihood and securing people's income. To this end, creating a balance between nature-based solution with poverty alleviation to avoid deforestation, using innovation and technology to provide better solutions for food security and increase agricultural production, as well as increasing resource efficiency by implementing circular economy are also on the list. As a final point, close cooperation and collaborative action is a must to take considerable opportunities ahead. We recognize how important it is as we strive to build a more resilient and better future at this critical moment. The coming year, UK government will host COP26 UNFCCC, and I hope it will become a great momentum to revive climate and sustainable development agenda in post-COVID era. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic is not an excuse to ignore the climate risk. Instead, I believe this pandemic offers a unique chance to building back sustainable futures through greening recovery plans and aligning with low carbon actions. And now, it's a good time to join and collaborate in this effort. To close, I would like to thank the United Kingdom government for continuous support and welcoming people collaboration on low carbon development and climate resilience that is stronger, more strategic, and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Munarafa. Thank you for sharing those lessons on Indonesia's leadership. I think they're extremely relevant as other countries look to green their economic recovery. You had 4 main points, which Indonesia has been really leading on. First, integrating green development into your economic development plan, as you have done with the recent RPJMN. For the next 5 years. That's incredibly important and really a historic move by Indonesia. Second, how to use this to help identify some of the specific opportunities in the economic recovery for green stimulus that can deliver jobs, can deliver income, can deliver better equity and equality. And then third, looking at the resilience, building resilience to unprecedented shocks. I think this very much resonates what Minister Goldsmith mentioned in terms of the unprecedented shock we're having now from COVID-19, but how much greater the potential for shocks from climate change and ecological destruction are. So how do we ensure we build our resilience to those future shocks, ensure food security, etc. And then fourth, that importance of the international collaboration and working together as we move forward. And we very much look forward to doing so as we approach COP26 in November next year. So thank you so much, Minister Munarafa. Thank you so much, Minister Goldsmith. It's been wonderful to have your insights from both the UK and Indonesia and on this international perspective of how we do a green, inclusive, equitable, and resilient recovery. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you. We will now turn to an excellent lineup of panelists we have here and experts to share further perspectives on how we move forward, both the challenges, but also the opportunities of ensuring this green, equitable, and resilient recovery. Let me first introduce our fantastic panel, and then I will have a few questions for each of them, following which we will have an open question and answer period with the participants joining us today. If I could ask any participant, if you do have a question for a specific panelist, please enter that at the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A chat box. Please put in there any questions you might like us to ask the participants, and we'll try to get through as many as possible in the Q&A session. But let me introduce our panelists first. So first we have John Merton, who is the UK government's COP26 envoy. John is one of the people leading the UK's effort to deliver strengthened global climate action and ambition ahead of the COP26 climate conference next November. And I hope will share with us some of the important perspective on the role of climate action in a low carbon recovery from what he is seeing with discussions with countries around the world. Next, we will have His Excellency Deputy Minister Arifin Rudianto, the Deputy Minister for Maritime and Natural Resources for the Indonesian Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. Pak Rudi has been instrumental in the efforts to develop the Low Carbon Development Initiative that Minister Munarafa just mentioned before. We also have joining us Rachel Biederman, who's the Director for the World Resources Institute in Brazil. Her team has just launched a new economy report for Brazil, which provides groundbreaking evidence on the ways in which Brazil can deliver a strong and equitable economic recovery through green investments and policies. And then we also have Nirarta Samadi, otherwise known as Pat Koni, who is the country director of WRI Indonesia, leading our work in Indonesia and working closely with the planning ministry, Bappenas, and others there in Indonesia. So as I said, I will start with 1 to 2 questions for each of our panelists, but then would open the floor for Q&A discussions, and would love it if colleagues could, on the call, any participants can put in any questions they'd like in the chat box, and we will collect them and get to as many as we can. So let me start today with John. John, there's no doubt that COVID pandemic has challenged countries on many fronts, as we've already heard from the ministers, from the economic to the health to the employment crises. They are also struggling in many countries to manage their climate commitments. Given all this, can you share your views on how countries can keep on track with their climate commitments under the Paris Agreement and ideally actually strengthen them, as Minister Goldsmith said the UK will be doing shortly on the road to COP26? How can we do both, managing the crisis at the moment, but also looking for opportunities to strengthen our climate commitments?
Thank you very much, Helen, and thanks to everyone involved in organising this panel. And it's great just to say hello to Deputy Minister Rudianto again. I recognise his office, having sat in it in February and had a really good discussion with him. This Zoom meeting and the webinar that we're having actually is a good example of an answer to the question you point out. When I saw Deputy Minister Rudianto in February, it involved several very long flights and several stopovers in numerous airports in order to get to see him. And then now at the click of a button, we can be having a conversation with very little in the way of carbon footprint. So I think just the very fact that the world is shifting to things like webinars is a good example of a green recovery in some ways. We don't have to necessarily see our recoveries out of COVID-19 as a reversion to what came before, but there's a new alternative future that we can invent for ourselves. And we see that a little bit as well in the UK. Just this week, we hit a new record because energy demand has been suppressed slightly. 59% of our power at one point this week was coming from wind energy alone. So it's like a little message from the future about what is possible. I do think it's possible to manage a green recovery. And that's really because the economics of energy production are shifting so radically at the moment. I don't think it would have been possible 10 years ago. But now, if you're wanting to grow your economy and provide energy to your population and enable them to take forward their economic growth, now, as Bloomberg and others have shown, for nearly 2/3 of the world's population, it's already cheaper to provide renewable energy, be that wind or solar or other forms of renewable, than it is to invest in fossil fuels. And that equation is continually changing every year. The cost of solar panels is coming down by 17% a year. And so it's very possible for us to sort of provide power for an economic recovery through cleaner and more efficient forms than investing in fossil fuels. And the work we've done with Deputy Minister Rudianto's planning ministry has shown that for Indonesia, there are several growth paths available to them, and we've done modelling with WRI and others to show that actually the highest growth economic pathway that Indonesia can choose is also the one that's associated with the lowest carbon emissions. So I think it's really possible to unify those two objectives of economic growth on the one hand and also tackling climate change on the other. And as Minister Goldsmith just before me mentioned, by so doing also we help address problems associated with loss of biodiversity. And it's clear as we approach 2021 and the 15th Conference of the Parties for the Convention on Biological Diversity in China and COP26, which will probably be held within a couple of months of each other next autumn, taking action to protect your biodiversity. And in Indonesia, you only need to look to your tropical forests or your tropical peat, will not only help tackle climate change, but it will also protect biodiversity as well. So I'm optimistic given the trends that we're seeing economically.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing those insights, both in terms of what you're seeing around the world with renewable energy prices and costs falling, making them much more cost competitive. And that's relevant, obviously, to the UK, but also to Indonesia and many other countries, but also in terms of the opportunities for forests and nature-based solutions, incredibly important. Can I ask a quick follow-up question? I know you're talking with governments in many other countries. Are there any particular sort of insights you're seeing in terms of opportunities for green measures turning up in other countries, which should be considered?
Yeah, we are seeing them. And even in countries where climate policy is, I think a good illustration of my last point is the fact that even in countries where climate policy is not progressive, we're seeing the sort of changes I've described. So if you look to the USA, President Trump was very clear that he wanted to protect the coal industry, and he wanted to protect coal miners, and he wanted to protect coal generation. What we've seen in the USA is that coal production is decreasing rapidly, and coal mines are shutting down, and coal power station is coming off stream, and investment in fossil fuels is being replaced by investment in renewables, even in a country without a really sort of clear climate policy. So if you look at Texas, even Texas, you know, the heart of oil country, in the last year, there was more investment in renewables in Texas than there was in oil and gas. And that's not happening, as I mentioned, due to a federal level environment policy. That's happening because hard-headed business people are taking decisions that are in their best financial interest. And what we're finding is that the cheapest form of power for many companies is renewables. The cheapest form of power for many grids is renewables, and it has the co-benefit of tackling climate change. And that's only going to get stronger. When I was in India, for example, we spoke with a minister who was very clear that within a few years' time, the marginal cost of operating a coal-fired power station would be more than the cost of building a new photovoltaic plant. And when you see the reductions in the cost of battery storage, you can see that you can link photovoltaics with batteries, and you can provide dispatchable power that will fuel economic growth far more cheaply than fossil fuels, and also deliver us cleaner cities, cleaner air, fewer respiratory diseases, and a whole range of wider economic benefits. And if I also just point to one other thing, you'll see consumers in many Western markets are increasingly seeking to make choices based on the environmental standards of a product. And you're seeing the emergence on things like the London Metal Exchange of a market differential pricing for different metals, for example. So soon consumers will want to start stipulating that they want carbon-free steel used in the production of their cars. And so countries like Indonesia, who want to compete in those markets, will want to keep investing in that new technology and stay ahead of the curve in order that they can have a competitive edge versus their competitors in the region and beyond.
Thank you, John. And that's a wonderful segue to our next panelist. I know that my colleague Rachel from Brazil will have to leave shortly to actually have a meeting in Brazil, which is very much focused on the green recovery. But you mentioned even if you're not pursuing actively strong climate policies, it actually just makes good economic sense now. Coal is no longer economically viable in most places. That's not possible if you're wanting to seize the opportunities to be more innovative, to have the new industries of the future where there's going to be the real demand from consumers. This is the time to shift to a green growth path, just purely for economic and social reasons, even if you aren't focused on the environmental. So let me pass to Rachel Biederman, as I said, head of the WRI Brazil office. They have just published a new Economy for Brazil report, which very much highlights the economic innovation and employment benefits of a green and resilient recovery for Brazil. Rachel, can you share with us a bit some of the results of this report and how it's being received in Brazil now?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so sorry to have to leave early for this other meeting. Well, it has been very well received in general. We have had a good audience and return. The study was launched this month, was very much inspired in the important work done in Indonesia. So I'm very honored to be here with you to share some of the results. We did this work in partnership with many universities and also the World Business Council representative in Brazil, and the Brazilian Federation of Banks also supported us a lot. The sectorial recommendations were focused and include quality infrastructure, industrial innovation, and sustainable agriculture. We found that the traditional Brazilian sectors are very well placed to become even more competitive globally by increasing productivity and promoting activities that are free of deforestation and environmental degradation. The study also shows that a transition to a new economy would benefit key sectors of the Brazilian economy. It would help the country gain more international market share and improve infrastructure in times of global recession. And perhaps the study can inspire other countries in a recovery and post-COVID era, and also influence our decision makers here. As countries mobilize resources to revive their growth and build back better and more resilient economies for the future, a green growth path that once seemed remote or disruptive now appears prudent and safe. So now is the time for Brazil to take this new course. In short, the main numbers the study brings are the following. A green recovery will allow Brazil's economy to grow more over the next decade than the current development model. And by 2030, compared to a business as usual, a low carbon climate resilient economy in Brazil could deliver 2 million jobs, total GDP gain of $535 billion. It would allow a restoration of 12 million hectares of degraded pasture lands. It would also allow $3.7 billion in additional agriculture production, another 144 million in additional tax revenues from the agricultural sector alone, a 42% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2025 compared to 2005 levels. And also it would increase access to international financing and private investment. It would also allow a reduction in air and water pollution with benefits for the Brazilian health, the health of Brazilians, and more resilient livelihoods and food security. So there are so many benefits that Brazil can have if we turn into this new path. So I really appreciate being here and sharing the numbers. You can access the results in our website. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I'm hoping one of our colleagues in the team can actually paste the link to that new Economy for Brazil study in the chat box also, so participants can see that. Can I ask one follow-up question? I mean, I understand there's been great reception. You've had well over 100 media outlets covering the story, including one of the leading business magazines, the economic newspapers in Brazil, really highlighting it. Some of the social media personalities have been highlighting it. So that's fantastic to hear. But I understand you're also hearing from some of the banks, the investors, the private sector, some parts of government who are seeing the real opportunities for economic recovery. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. We have been engaging in the last couple of days. We've been having these calls and people asking for more information on the results. And we will be engaging this week and the next couple of weeks with some big investors and also big banks who are working closely to the government on the recovery of the Amazonian economy in special. So we are very thrilled that the numbers we are bringing show a new path, and that the Brazilian economic leaders and business leaders and financial leaders are picking up on this and understand that there is a way for Brazil to build back better. And we are very excited that the numbers we are showing are really catching up in the Brazilian leadership.
Thank you so much. So as John said, the green recovery just makes good economic sense. And as we're seeing in Brazil, that's where the investments want to go. So to attract private investment, to get that needed boost in finance and investment, green recovery is definitely the right direction. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. Now I'd like to turn to Deputy Minister Rudianto. Pak Rudi, a question for you. We are seeing some really important examples of how a transition to a low carbon economy can deliver economic benefits and build a stronger, fairer, and cleaner communities, as we've heard from the last couple of speakers and the two ministers who kicked off this event. The Low Carbon Development Initiative, which you have really helped to champion and bring forward, has made Indonesia a leader globally in identifying such opportunities. Can you tell us a bit more about the findings from the LCDI work and also some of the opportunities and challenges in actually getting these to be adopted, not just in the 5-year economic plan, but also working with colleagues across ministries? How do you think these are moving, and how are they affected by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Helen, and good morning for Mr. John Morton. Hope to see you again on the next COP in Scotland. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate to Helen and your team for hosting this important event. I also would like to extend our gratitude to the UK government for continuous support to the government of Indonesia, especially in the low carbon development context. In responding to your question, Helen, we in Bappenas have initiated low carbon development, or LCDI, since 2017, with the aim to integrate the policy scenarios in our National Medium-Term Development Plan 2020-2024. The process was carried out through a holistic, integrated, thematic, and spatial, and was launched last year. As the result, we now have our first time ever Green Medium-Term Development Plan that has incorporated low carbon policy scenarios. Another significant achievement is that greenhouse gas emission reduction is now considered as one of macroeconomic indicators, which means the national achievement of greenhouse gas emission reduction will be closely monitored annually along with economic growth, poverty reduction, Gini ratio, Human Development Index, and unemployment rate. Back to the LCDI report. Our findings from the extensive modeling work is that the LCDI ambitious scenario will unlock an array of additional benefit for Indonesia, alongside with the achievement of greenhouse gas emission reduction and economic growth as follows. First, a more rapid reduction in poverty than the current trajectory. More than 15 million additional jobs, which are greener and better paid. Over 40,000 deaths avoided through reduced air pollution, prevention loss of forest and peatland, and more resilient people from disease and global pandemic. However, this COVID-19 pandemic has a multidimensional impact and changed people's life, including Indonesian development policies. In 2020, most of development programs have been shifted and focused to the health sector, social safety net, and economic stability. Most targets have been stated in the National Midterm Plan 2020 and the Annual Work Plan 2020 are likely cannot to be accomplished due to the shifting of priority. In this regard, we have to see this as an opportunity to build back better toward a low carbon and resilient future by carefully allocating fiscal stimulus to accelerate green jobs and leverage green economy. That's our experience in Indonesia.
Thank you so much for that, sharing that experience, Deputy Minister Rudianto, and also the concrete numbers of the potential in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of other economic and social benefit from a low carbon development pathway, but also the links between COVID and the environment pillar of the economic development strategy. As you say, this is an opportunity to move forward, but there are also a lot of challenges in doing so. I'd love to ask you, in terms of where you see the real priorities right now, the one or two things that you think are most essential in terms of building back better in Indonesia. It'd be great to hear your perspectives on those, Pak Rudy, if you're able to share the key priorities you think now.
Okay, buka lagi. President Jokowi, in his speech a few days ago, explained very clearly that we have to use the momentum of the pandemic to consolidate our plan and jump further ahead to accelerate and transform our business as usual to a better development activity. This is in line with the application of Build Back Better principle that we in Bappenas keep pursuing ahead in conjunction with the implementation of LCDI that has already been planned in the current RBGMN. An approach to keep LCDI still in the government priorities is to address more on how we can create green jobs, improve health through a clean air, increase productivity, and resilient to future shocks. So, Build Back Better will be focused more on human well-being and inclusiveness rather than climate and environmental per se. The Build Back Better principle aims toward improving our resilience in response to future threat of the crisis. We will do this in a smooth transition process. The next government work plan in Indonesia for 2021 is still focusing on accelerating growth, economic recovery, and social reform. However, we will revive the implementation of low carbon development through several measures. We have identified that at least there are 9 major projects to support the implementation of low carbon development out of 42 strategic priority projects in 2021. We really hope those RCD activities in 2021 could show the continuation of strong government willingness to implement low carbon development in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Rudianto. Wonderful to hear that President Jokowi is still very dedicated to moving this forward, and that in terms of the priorities for Build Back Better, it's very much now focused on human well-being and inclusiveness. But as you have seen through your work on the Low Carbon Development Initiative, going low carbon and resilient can actually help to deliver some of those important benefits in terms of human well-being. So great to hear about the 9 major projects that are supporting that acceleration of the low carbon development as part of the economic recovery. And I very much hope that you'll be able to identify more as you go forward, which can deliver on the goals of human well-being and inclusiveness as well. Thank you so much, Deputy Minister Rudianto. Now let me turn to our final panelist, Pak Koni, who leads the WRI Indonesia office. Pak Koni, we are hearing a lot about the ways in which Indonesia can build back better from Deputy Minister Rudianto, from Minister Monarafa. But what are some of the high-level priorities for the recovery that you can see in terms of where there will be real opportunities to deliver the kinds of benefits that Pak Rudi has just emphasized, both in terms of human well-being, inclusiveness, and boosting economic recovery?
Thanks, Helen. So I'll be conveying a bit of a background of the current situation in Indonesia. Current response from the government of Indonesia is still very much focusing to keep the economy afloat. Indonesia is now entering what we call adoption of a new normal or new habits by kick-starting economic activities while keep struggling to fight the pandemic. We can see the figure of the existing budget stimulus response of the government that most of the budget is currently allocated to economic recovery. Around 589 trillion of rupiah out of 677 trillion is allocated for national economic recovery. Pak Rudi kindly share what it is in his last presentation. While around 87 trillion is allocated for the health sector. There are, of course, opportunities for the government of Indonesia to build back better towards a low carbon and resilient future within that national economic recovery, mainly because the government has incorporated the low carbon development initiative into the medium-term development plan, or RPJMN 2020-2024. Minister of Planning already mentioned a bit aspects of that. In this case, Bappenas is leading to push Build Back Better and also Build Back a Greener agenda to be the core of the COVID-19 recovery process. For me, our observation, the priorities for Indonesia in this effort we need to, to keep low carbon development initiative in the midterm development plan, RPJM on track, and put green recovery plan within the low carbon development initiative framework. There are a lot of evidences demonstrate that low carbon development and green recovery can create greener and better jobs. We can show that a green recovery is much better and more sustainable to build a resilient future. Rudy and Minister Monarfa already shared some numbers, which are quite convincing. We have to admit that. We have to also connect financial aid for people and fiscal stimulus with low carbon activities. For example, to apply low carbon criteria as prerequisite of fiscal or tax incentives for private sector. Some illustration that I could share here are companies, for example, must restore natural infrastructure such as forest, peat, and mangrove. Companies must support fight against fires and illegal logging. Companies could also must meet a certain level of energy efficiency as a prerequisite before getting stimulus or support. We have to also enhance our resilience to anticipate for possible future shocks. For example, by building infrastructure that supports food supply and distribution across the country, hence ensuring food security and protecting our farmers. In this case, also mentioned by Minister Goldsmith, by investing in nature-based solutions that both employ people and avoid shocks in the future. This is, for example, can be through degraded forest land and peat restoration projects, and also conserving intact forests through different approach, or this is what we call intact forest-based new economy. I'll stop there. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Pak Kony, and also for emphasizing really the role of the private sector as well, and how companies can be a part of this, but what governments can do to help encourage them to help with the solutions through the stimulus package. So in order to get the stimulus, companies can help contribute to social and environmental benefits, which will benefit all of Indonesia and Indonesians as well. So thank you so much for that. We do have a few questions that have come in through the question and answer chat for some of the panelists. So I'd like to present a couple of these to our colleagues on the panel. If I might, there's a couple here which are really focused on Indonesia, and I might ask if Pak Rudy might be willing to answer some of these. I see we are also very honored to be joined by Pak Medrilzam, who is a director in Bappenas, who has really been doing a lot of the hard work of actually making the Low Carbon Development Initiative come to bear, a fantastic partner for us. So I wonder if Pak Rudy, Pak Medril, you might be willing to answer some of these questions about Indonesia. Let me share with you 3 questions that have come in specific to Indonesia, and then you can choose which ones you might want to answer from those. And then I've also got a few questions for John in the Q&A as well. So let me start first of all, Pak Rudy, Pak Medril, Pak Kony might also answer some of these. But sure. So the 3 questions are: first, what can governments do to reduce carbon emissions and increase carbon absorption in forests, in particular in Indonesia? What are the next priorities in terms of realizing Indonesia's carbon superpower through the forests? What can we actually do there? That's one question. A second question is actually also about land use, really about Indonesia's local farmers, many of whom are finding difficulties in expanding their productivity or their production and achieving good benefits in terms of income. How can we help them to do that while also reducing emissions? So what does that mean for small shareholders, farmer shareholders? What are the benefits from going low carbon there? And then the third question is really, are there any plans to shift the focus of R&D investments by the government in Indonesia to really sort of mainstream the green recovery through R&D? Let me pass over to Pak Rudy, and if there's any further comments that either Pak Madril or Pak Kony would like to share, I'll pass to you next. And then a couple of questions I'll pose to John. Thank you. Pak Rudy, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen. First of all, like I have mentioned, the green greenhouse emission already become a macro indicator of our development. It means that to achieve this indicator, all land ministries should support this. And we have prepared a roadmap to achieve this target. For example, we have a roadmap towards carbon trade. And legally, we have prepared a presidential decree to regulate the mechanism of carbon trade, and will be led by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And also in the term of transportation will be led by Ministry of Transportation and so on. So we set up the roadmap. But also from this pandemic, we use this as a momentum in which all stakeholders, not only government, but non-state actors also involved in this effort. And no, the government acting as enabling government. We acting as a regulator, sometimes facilitator, sometimes as an innovator, sometimes implementer. So through this LCDA, we already attracted many private sectors and also universities and also non-government organizations. And the most important also, the youth generation very interested with the LCDA, and they would like to involve on many programs that government set up. And we use SDGs as the framework. So we attract all stakeholders to support LCDA as a pillar environment of SDGs. So we use the SDGs approach, especially for environmental pillar and environmental aspect through LCDA program. Using three framework: regulatory framework, institutional framework, and also investment framework. Within investment framework, we use blended finance. So we share which part will be paid by the government and which part will be paid by private sector. And we agreed about the general program and also specific project to use this. Yeah. It's from my side. Maybe Pak Madril will add this many answer as well. Silakan Pak Madril.
Thank you, Pak Rudy and Bu Helen. I'd like to respond straight from the questions with regards to the what sort of big things that we are going to do actually during this Build Back Better or green recovery. I think what we need to underline is actually we still be consistent with what we have already planned previously in low carbon developments, that we are going to focus on at least five sectors in energy and also forest and peats, and also to improve our agriculture productivity, waste, and also green industries and coastals and blue carbon. So basically, we still be consistent, and we, as Pak Rudis also mentions, of course, when we do this, we will be doing using some means of implementations. We'll still be consistent as well with what we have already discussed in the negotiations, that we will improve our capacity, we will improve our technology, and also last but not least about finance. We know that Pak Rudy has already mentioned as well that there are a lot of actually potential financial resources that we can utilize, and several methods like blended finance that we can also use to expedite all these 5 programs under the low carbon developments. Just for your information, this year we are doing what we call mapping out of all funding resources from the government spending that we have already allocated. This is still an ongoing exercise, and hopefully in early October we can inform you about actually how much actually we have already allocated so far for low carbon developments that we have already implemented in Indonesia. And an interesting question as well. So what's for the smallholders actually? That's a very interesting question, and I believe for smallholders, one of our big programs in agriculture is to improve our productivities, and of course this will be very close linked to our avoiding of deforestation actually. And when we deal with this improvement of productivity, of course we work together with the people who's working in R&D in line ministries, in universities, and this will of course improve the livelihood of the smallholders as well, and also the way they practice the agriculture itself. For example, so we in our experience in Bappenas, we have some direct works with the smallholders in our programs, what we call Indonesia Climate Change Trust Fund. We work together very closely with the what we call apa itu namanya, pengolahan lahan tanpa bakar, no burn. When you open the land, so you usually previously the farmers actually open the land using fires, but when we do some kind of research together with the line ministries and also with the universities, we found several ways to tell to the farmers, to the smallholders, not to burn the shrubs and so on when they open for their agriculture practices. And there are a lot of measures actually that we have already engaged with the smallholders. And basically, what is the important thing exactly? We need to note all this experience. We have to take the writings of this experience and share to others, and replicate to others as well. So this is one of the critical parts that probably later that we need to work further. And last but not least, for energy sectors, I would like to underline this because this is the most important sectors in the future for Indonesia for reducing the emissions. I think we need to underline that we are in the process of a transition here from fossil fuel to the renewable energy. And of course, when we talk about transitions, it needs time. We just cannot make it just one day to improve all these energy sectors to become more 100% cleaner. So basically, but what I would like to say here that actually we are on the right path, we are on the right track. Also, COVID-19 here, we have to admit that this is a big challenge for us to cover. But as the minister mentioned as well in his speech, that actually we are now reviving our work. Especially in 2021, we revive our work, and in 2022 we will be in the right track and in the right pace and again. That's my contributions, Helen. Over back to you.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued by one of the questions mentioning about the carbon superpower. Yes, indeed, we instinctively know that Indonesia is country rich with carbon stock, if you like. But there are things that have to be done before we actually, able to call ourselves as a carbon superpower, and then take advantage. I mean, in a positive kind of way, the existence of carbon. So first of all, is getting real, a value of the forest, peat and mangrove, not just in terms of their carbon stock, but also biodiversity. And knowing this in a robust kind of manner would make us understand on how much we need to put a value on them, and how then we can use it. How we can use it means that we need to have what we call a carbon pricing policy. I mean, the government is currently undertaking seriously this effort. Should we have that, then we would be able to, moving toward the path of becoming carbon superpower. One of the things that we could do, though, when we have those two already in place, is to create what I just mentioned earlier on about the intact forest new climate economy. This would require the support that Minister Goldsmith mentioned earlier on, which is the support from the International Finance Initiative. Why it is needed? Because to have a new economy based on the intact forest would require, some sort of injection, if you like, investment that would, allow for a new form of economic which, not traditionally as business as usual, for lack of a better word, using forest actually as the source of economic generator, but instead using it, the forest standing as the economic generator. This would require investment, which could be able to be provided by international community. I'll stop there. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you so much. And so we've heard from colleagues from Indonesia some very specific opportunities there in terms of engaging investors and the private sector, engaging with the youth, the opportunity from enhancing agricultural productivity, which can boost livelihoods for small farmers, but also some of the challenges of how to replicate this and take this to scale. The importance of the energy transition underway now in Indonesia away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy, but also how carbon pricing can help Indonesia to move forward even quicker, and the opportunities from intact forest new climate economy. So some real opportunities there. Thank you. John, I'm going to pass to you for two quick questions, not necessarily the easiest ones, but one from your experience and discussions with colleagues in China. What do you see as the chances of China moving ahead with enhancing its climate action? That's one. And the second one is how we've got an incredible youth movement building, and Minister Rudianto, Deputy Minister Rudianto mentioned in Indonesia, but we're seeing it around the world. How can we actually build on this movement and help us to transform?
Thanks, Helen. Two questions. I mean, the first on China. China's a bit of a paradox on climate change, right? It's significantly the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and so it's easy to portray them in a negative light. Equally, it's significantly the world's largest manufacturer of photovoltaic cells. It accounts, I think, for 45% of all the zero-emission vehicles on the road in the world, and it's the largest producer of zero-emission vehicles. So, yes, Chinese emissions are too high, and we want them to commit to reducing them. But counterintuitively, at the same time, China is the source of many of the solutions that will help tackle climate change. So we want to obviously encourage the latter and discourage the former. And I think that debate is changing in China. We've just seen recently one of the major the paradox is a lot of the state-owned companies are into coal and a lot of the private companies are into renewables. And so I think in China, as in Indonesia and other places, the more you deregulate markets and you allow competition, what you find is the competition drives you towards renewable energy because it's cheapest, it's more efficient, there are fewer externalities. So I think as China progresses along that road and we see some state-owned enterprises wanting a slice of the renewable pie, and we see the central bodies in China thinking that they no longer want to subsidize loss-making coal mines, we can effect change. The US election's obviously going to have an impact, but I think that the key to persuading China will be all acting ourselves. So the UK will come out with an ambitious NDC, hopefully by the end of the year, and hopefully if Indonesia and others come out with ambitious NDCs that will encourage the Chinese government to move, because they will feel more isolated. Equally, we'll be working with China to convince them of the economic arguments, and we'll point to things like the fact that Tesla is now the world's most valuable motor manufacturing company by market capitalization, even though it produces far fewer cars than, say, Toyota, and it's the most valuable because the markets anticipate the future. So similarly in Indonesia, if you want a slice of that value chain, you've got to be investing in those zero emission technologies. That's why my own government is working to get gigafactories in. And thirdly, we want to identify the risks to China. And you're seeing this already with the rising water levels on the Three Gorges Dam. You see that they've had unseasonably high rainfall in China over the last few months, and the cost of climate change in terms of increased flooding and damage to our economies is far greater than the cost of acting to prevent it in the first place. So I'm confident that if we all pursue those routes, that China will come forward with an enhanced NDC, and I'm confident in the capacity of Chinese firms to deliver climate action. In terms of youth, well, directly there's the Italian Youth COP that our Italian partners will be organizing. But I'm inspired by the capacity of youth to transform this debate. You only have to look at Greta Thunberg, who's got such a huge following on social media and has really influenced debate so that she can walk into Angela Merkel's office in Germany and have a conversation with her. And I just think, I've got 4 children and I'm anticipating a 5th later in the year, and they pester me about climate change. And so a message to young children out there is all the presidents and prime ministers around the world have got children too. And if we all pester our mums and dads, actually we can have a significant difference, because people do listen. I may not be able to persuade some of my Indonesian colleagues in my meetings, but what I think will have a far bigger impact is if their children nag them when I get home or pester them when they get home. That will probably have far more influence than any amount of diplomacy that I can do. So I encourage children to pester their parents and remind them just how important climate change is, because ultimately it's children that will be living with the worst consequences of climate change, not fuddy-duddy old people like myself.
Thank you so much, John, both on the insights in terms of China, their potential, the real opportunities there for leading the charge, but also the importance of other countries, Indonesia, the UK, others stepping forward and enhancing ambition to encourage China as well too. And also on youth, absolutely agree with you. If we can just get the children of the world, it's their future, it's in their hands. Many of them are very, very concerned about the future. If they can nag their parents, we would really change the world. Their parents are currently in charge of the finance, a business, a government. Having those children step up and speak their minds and demand a better future for themselves is probably one of the best ways of influencing them. Thank you so much, John. A fantastic panel there. And before we close, I want to pass to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Mary Pangestu, the World Bank's Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships, and formerly a Minister of Trade for Indonesia from 2004 to 2011, and Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy from 2011 to 2014. So I'm very much hoping that Ibu Marie, you will share with us some of the insights you have from your incredible experience in Indonesia, but also with what the World Bank is doing now. The World Bank is, of course, an incredibly important partner in helping countries to implement a green recovery as we go forward. So Dr. Pangestu, over to you. We'd love to hear from you, your insights.
Thank you, Helen, for inviting me to join this low carbon footprint webinar, as John put it. I would like to thank Minister Goldsmith and Minister Monoarfa for sharing their experiences in the UK and Indonesia, as well as all our panelists for providing really insightful perspectives on the roles we can all play in the sustainable and resilient recovery, or as all of you have been saying, build back better, or for short, I'm going to call it the Triple B strategy. And as others have mentioned, COVID-19 is a wake-up call for which reinforces the need for climate action. COVID-19 has reminded us that early action is vital. Science is the basis for good decision-making, and that's why we can't delink the Earth's ecology from its human and economic health. And as Minister Goldsmith and others have said, there is good news. There's a silver lining in the clouds that we are facing with the repercussions of the COVID crisis, that we can also make progress on the challenges like climate change. Or to put it simply, triple B strategy can lead to triple A outcomes. Researchers at Oxford and elsewhere have concluded that strategic investments promoting both climate and economic goals do more to enhance national wealth, build human and social and natural capital, including biodiversity, as was reminded just then, than the business as usual investments. Growth and climate action are not trade-offs. And this is kind of the message that many of us have been repeating over and over again. And I think John reminded us also that the technology today allows us to do so. So there's no excuse in that sense as well. Indonesia is an interesting case that amplifies these points, as Minister Manoarfa has shared with us. I was honored to be a commissioner on this LCDI initiative supporting Bappenas, and the report concluded, as Rudy explained, a green growth pathway that would deliver faster growth, poverty reduction, and more jobs, as well as emission reductions beyond Indonesia's current NDCs, compared to business as usual. And renewable energy delivers better health outcomes than a strategy that emphasizes a heavy reliance on coal-fired power plants and industrial facilities. It is most heartening to hear from Minister Manoarfa and Pak Rudy that LCDI is not just a report that was put on the shelf, but has been integrated into the Green Medium-Term Development Plan of Indonesia, incorporating low carbon policies. For the first time, we have greenhouse gas emission reduction as one of its macro development indicators. I think that's real progress. And as Minister Manoarfa shared, is beginning to be reflected in the green stimulus plans in the response to COVID. By the way, for politicians and policymakers, and as commissioners, we kept on reminding them this is a very important metric. It is very important to say that the strategy is increasing jobs and improving livelihoods. This is a very key metric, and I was happy that the Brazil study also focused in a similar fashion. There is much to be learned from Indonesia's efforts and from other research emerging from the bank and other international institutions that take lessons from efforts to address the major global economic crisis of a decade ago. Some of these include, first, there is a need to focus on policy reforms as well as investments. As many of you have mentioned, financing of a low carbon pathway, and we need to have private sector investment. And for that to happen, we need to also have the deregulation and policy reforms. For instance, fossil subsidy reforms and carbon pricing, as Pak Koni mentioned, as well as binding targets to reduce use of fossil fuels, can be very important elements of this reform strategy. Not only do they incentivize green investments, they can also reduce overall government spending, and the funding that was used for the fuel subsidy can be used for other purposes, including green infrastructure. The World Bank has worked with many countries on fuel subsidy reforms. Over 2013 and 2014, 30 countries undertook fossil fuel subsidy reforms, and we are currently working with a few countries on fuel subsidy and broader energy reforms. Second, we need to integrate climate risk into national financial systems. This is one of the, I believe, one of the priorities of the work under COP26. And one of the more noteworthy financial trends to emerge during this current crisis is the acceleration of investments in firms actively taking environmental, social, and governance concerns into account. And increasingly, this is becoming mandatory as well as being factored as risk factors. Both the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action and the Task Force on Climate-Related Finance Disclosure are good sources of information for governments looking for practical actions they can take to green their budgets. Indonesia, by the way, also has been doing a green tagging of their budget and promote higher levels of ESG investment in their country. IFIs and MDBs, such as the World Bank, of course, have a big role in spurring low carbon and climate resilient investment. At the World Bank Group, for the last 6 months, we've been working overtime to support governments as they grapple with the repercussions of the COVID crisis. In the emergency phase, we focus heavily on helping governments manage the immediate health and economic social crisis. But key to our support henceforth is a focus on building back better with long-term economic transformation and sustainable and inclusive growth. We are off to a good start, as in FY 2020, we managed to disperse $74 billion, and despite COVID, we have been able to achieve 30% climate co-benefits. We've done this by developing checklists that governments can use to assess the short and long-term impacts of different proposals being considered for their economic recovery package. And the goal is really to develop programs that are win-win in terms of equity, growth potential, and environmental impact. And this includes designing climate-informed development policy financing that supports sustainable and resilient recovery through climate actions. For example, shifting to cleaner transport and low carbon energy. We're also talking to governments about the role of nature-based solutions. Some countries such as Costa Rica have all actually adopted an integrated low carbon development strategy, just like what we have been talking about. And others have also begun to introduce carbon pricing. We're also working on programs that focus on investments in natural systems like forests and mangroves. Our studies actually show that 1.3 billion people derive direct and indirect benefits from forests in the form of employment, forest products, livelihoods, and incomes. So this is very relevant for Indonesia as the potential nature superpower. And it is estimated that by protecting these assets, combined with strong forest protection, we could deliver over 2 trillion per year of economic benefits, generate many jobs, improve food security, and deliver 1/3 of the climate solution. So I think focusing on forests, as Indonesia is doing, is again another big part of the strategy. I'd like to just conclude by saying that we have come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And the work is essential to do now. Now is the time. This is a once in a century moment to collectively build back better for the future of our youth and grandchildren. And for the record, John, my children have been pestering me on climate change for some time. Helen knows this. And let's all work together on a BBB strategy for AAA outcomes. And the key word there is let's all work together. Thank you very much for joining us for today's very rich discussions. I've learned a lot and will continue to learn, and hopefully we can all work together in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pangestu, and thank you for all that you and colleagues in World Bank are doing to really help lead the charge here. It's fantastic that you've been able to disperse so much funds even under COVID this year, and that 30% of those were climate targeted. The focus on win-win opportunities, equity, growth, and environment is incredibly essential. So thank you so much for that. And a special thank you to Minister Goldsmith and Minister Mona Rafa, to our esteemed panelists who joined us today, and all our participants for joining us. We've had a wide number of people from around the world. I'd like to offer special thanks also to the UK Climate Change Unit team, to colleagues in Bappenas, the Ministry of Planning in Indonesia, and to the LCDI Secretariat for their amazing work to help plan this webinar and bring it together. It's clear that we're living through a convergence of crises: the COVID-19 health crisis, the resulting economic and employment crises, the inequality crisis, and the ongoing climate crisis. We are much more vulnerable, but also much more interconnected than we ever understood before. But the solutions too are intertwined, as Ibu Marie emphasized at the end. We need to work together on these. We can build on the positive examples and leadership that is emerging, and we heard about today from the UK, from Indonesia, and the potential opportunities in Brazil. And as Dr. Pangestu said, we need a BBB strategy, a Build Back Better BBB strategy, which can deliver a AAA outcome. This is what the finance community, investors are looking for. It's what businesses are looking for. And it's absolutely what youth are demanding. It's their futures that we hold in our hands, and we can follow their lead and respond accordingly. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for the fantastic insights and for the discussions. And we look forward to working with you all to reset our economies to a path that is fairer, stronger, safer, and clearer. Let's go and build back better. Thank you.